I still remember the exact moment when my 15-year marriage died. And it wasn't when I found receipts for expensive jewelry I'd never received, or when Gerard started working overtime every weekend, or even when he suddenly became protective of his phone like it contained state secrets. No, it was when I heard him on a call in our garage at 11 p.m., his voice tender in a way it hadn't been with me in years, telling someone, "Don't worry, baby. My wife is already gone. She just doesn't know it yet. Once the promotion comes through next month, I'll have enough saved up to start our real life together." Before we jump back in, tell us where you're tuning in from, and if this story touches you, make sure you're subscribed, because tomorrow I've saved something extra special for you. My name is Alexa, and for 15 years, I thought I was living the American dream, in our colonial house on Maple Street in Westfield, Connecticut. Gerard and I had built what everyone called the perfect life. He was a senior financial advisor at Meridian Wealth Management, pulling in 6 figures while I had been working as a freelance graphic designer from home, managing our household and supporting his career aspirations. We had our routine: morning coffee together, his kiss goodbye before heading to the office, dinner discussions about his clients and my projects, weekend antiquing trips through New England. I was the wife who organized his business dinners, who knew exactly how he liked his shirts pressed, who had spent countless evenings alone while he networked at industry events. I was the woman who had put her own career ambitions on hold when he said my freelance income was nice supplemental money, but his career needed to be the priority. I had been patient, supportive, understanding. Everything a devoted wife should be. But that night in November, hiding behind our Honda Civic in the garage while Gerard paced near his BMW, I realized I had been playing the role of loving wife in a marriage that had ended long ago, at least in his mind. "I know it's hard, Nadine," he was saying, his voice softer than I'd heard it in months. "But trust me, I've got everything figured out. The Hartwell account comes through next month. That's a $2 million investment with a substantial commission. Combined with what I've already set aside, we'll have more than enough for the down payment on that condo in Boston you loved." My legs felt weak. The Hartwell account was something he'd been working on for 8 months, his potential career-making deal. He'd told me the commission would finally allow us to renovate our kitchen and maybe take that European vacation we'd been planning for years. But apparently those plans had never included me. "No, she has no idea," he continued, and I could hear him smiling through his words. "Alexa's completely oblivious. She thinks we're this happy couple saving for our future together. She doesn't. No, I've been moving money into separate accounts for the past year. By the time I tell her, I'll already be gone." The garage suddenly felt Arctic cold, despite the November evening being relatively mild. A year. He had been systematically planning my abandonment for an entire year while I made his dinner every night, while I celebrated his small victories. At work, while I defended him to my friends who wondered why he was so frequently absent from family gatherings. "I love you too, baby," he whispered. "Just a few more weeks of pretending, and then we can stop hiding. I promise, after Christmas, I'll tell her everything. I'll file for divorce in January, and we can start house hunting in Boston. She'll keep the house here. I'm not cruel, but everything else comes with me to our new life." What struck me most wasn't just the betrayal, though that cut deep enough to leave me breathless. It was the calculated cruelty of his timeline. He was planning to let me enjoy one final Christmas as his wife, probably watching me put effort into selecting his gifts, preparing his favorite holiday meals, maybe even attending his office Christmas party as the smiling, supportive spouse. All while knowing it would be our last. The phrase, "my wife is already gone," kept echoing in my mind. Not "my marriage is over," or "I want a divorce," or even "I'm leaving my wife." No, in Gerard's mind, I had already ceased to exist as a person, with feelings, rights, or any claim to the life we'd built together. I was simply an obstacle to be managed until he could comfortably dispose of me. I pressed my back against the cold metal of the car, trying to steady my breathing as he continued. His conversation with this Nadine woman, He was describing their future with the kind of enthusiasm he used to have when talking about our plans. The condo in Boston's Back Bay, weekend trips to Martha's Vineyard, maybe even a destination wedding once his divorce was finalized. She won't fight it, he said confidently. Alexa's not the type. She'll probably just accept whatever settlement I offer and move on. She's always been too passive to cause real trouble. That last comment did something unexpected to me. Instead of crushing me further, it sparked something I hadn't felt in years, pure, cold anger. Not the heated rage of a woman discovering an affair, but the calculated fury of someone who had just realized exactly how little her husband thought of her capabilities. Gerard had apparently forgotten that before I became his accommodating wife, I had been the graphic designer who built her own freelance business from nothing. He'd forgotten that I was the one who managed all our household finances, who had caught several errors in our tax returns that our accountant had missed, who had actually been the one to suggest the investment strategies that had grown our savings. In the early years of our marriage, most importantly, he'd forgotten that I had access to every single one of our accounts, all our financial records, and 15 years of knowledge about his business practices, his clients, and his methods. In his mind, I was already gone, just a passive placeholder waiting to be discarded. But as I listened to him plan my erasure from his life, using money I had helped him save and connections I had helped him build, I realized Gerard was about to learn something about his passive wife that would shock him far more than anything I could have discovered about his affair. If he wanted me gone, I would disappear. But I wouldn't be going empty-handed, and I certainly wouldn't be going quietly. After all, he'd said it himself. His wife was already gone. Time to introduce him to the woman who was taking her place. I slipped back into the house through the side door, my mind reeling from what I'd just witnessed. Gerard was still in the garage, his voice now muffled through the walls but his laughter occasionally breaking through. The sound made my stomach turn. How many nights had I heard him come in late from these work calls, never suspecting he was actually planning my systematic destruction? I went straight to our home office, my hands trembling as I powered up the computer. For the first time in our marriage, I was grateful for Gerard's obsessive need to have me manage our household accounts. "You're so much better with details, honey," he'd always said. "I trust you to handle the boring stuff while I focus on bringing in the real money." The real money. The phrase took on a sinister new meaning as I logged into our banking portal. What I discovered over the next 2 hours made my blood run cold. Gerard hadn't just been moving some money to separate accounts. He had been systematically draining our shared future for the past 14 months. Every account I thought was growing for our retirement, our dream European vacation, the kitchen renovation I'd been planning, had been hemorrhaging money in small, calculated withdrawals. $2,500 here, transferred to investment opportunities. $3,800 there. Moved to what he'd told me was a high-yield CD that required a separate bank. How $200 monthly payments to something listed as professional development courses that I now realized were probably payments toward a Boston apartment lease. The pattern was meticulous and deliberate, never enough to trigger my attention during our monthly budget reviews, but consistent enough that he'd moved over $78,000 of our joint savings into accounts I'd never seen statements for. Money I'd helped earn through late nights working on design projects while he worked late. Money I'd saved by clipping coupons, choosing generic brands, postponing my own purchases so we could build our future together. But the real knife in my heart came when I found the insurance policy changes. 3 months ago, Gerard had quietly changed the beneficiary on his life insurance policy from me to someone named Nadine Walsh. The same day, he'd reduced our joint coverage and canceled the policy that would have paid off our mortgage if something happened to him. He'd literally made arrangements to ensure that if he died, I would lose both my husband and my home while his girlfriend became financially secure. I stared at the computer screen, the cursor blinking on the beneficiary change confirmation. Preparing and narrating this story took us a lot of time, so if you are enjoying it, subscribe to our channel. It means a lot to us. Now back to the story. The date was August 15th, the same day I'd made his favorite dinner to celebrate his promotion to senior advisor at Meridian. While I'd been toasting his success with champagne, he'd been ensuring I had no legal claim to the security we'd built together. The filing cabinet in our office held even more damning evidence. Gerard kept physical copies of everything, a habit I'd always admired as thorough. Now I understood it was the meticulous record-keeping of someone planning a complex financial crime. Hidden behind our tax returns was a folder I'd never seen before, marked Boston Transition. Inside were apartment listings, utility setup confirmations, and a credit check dated 6 months ago, all in Gerard's name alone. There was even a job inquiry letter to a wealth management firm in Boston's financial district, expressing his interest in relocating to the Boston area for personal reasons and emphasizing his desire to start fresh with a new client base. The most devastating discovery was a printed email chain between Gerard and Nadine spanning 8 months. Reading their messages was like watching strangers plan a life that included my husband, but erased me completely. "I can't wait until we don't have to sneak around anymore," Nadine had written. The apartment viewing went perfectly. The landlord loved us. "And that furniture store you mentioned has everything we need for a fresh start." Gerard's response made my chest tighten. "Soon, baby. Just keep being patient. I know it's hard pretending I'm single when we're out, but once I cut ties completely, we can be open about everything. I've almost got enough saved for both the security deposit and the furniture. Alexa never pays attention to the detailed statements anyway." They had been shopping for furniture together, planning a home that included absolutely no trace of the 15 years I'd spent building a life with this man. In Nadine's mind, I wasn't even an obstacle to overcome. I was simply irrelevant. But the worst message came from just 2 weeks ago. "Gerard, I keep feeling guilty about the wife thing. Maybe we should wait until you actually file for divorce. Before we sign the lease?" His response was swift and cold. "Don't overthink it, Nadine. Alexa is basically a roommate at this point. Our marriage has been dead for years. I'm just making it official. She's getting exactly what she deserves, which is a quiet life in a paid-off house. Most women would be grateful for that kind of security." As I dug deeper into Gerard's hidden files, I realized this wasn't just about an affair, or even a new relationship. This was about the complete erasure of my existence from his life narrative. He had rewritten our history to justify his actions, turning 15 years of partnership into a burden he was generously freeing himself from. In his correspondence with the Boston job recruiter, he'd described himself as recently separated, with no dependents or significant financial obligations. According to Gerard's version of reality, I didn't exist. Our shared investments were his investments. Our home was a property he was graciously leaving to his ex-wife. Our marriage was an unfortunate chapter he was finally ready to close. What infuriated me most was the casual ease with which he'd erased me from his professional narrative. These were colleagues who knew us both, who had attended dinner parties at our home, who had watched me support Gerard's career for over a decade. Yet he was confidently presenting himself as unburdened and available for a fresh start. I heard the garage door opening and quickly shut down the computer. Gerard was coming back inside, probably feeling satisfied with his secret phone call and the progress on his escape plan. As his footsteps approached the office, I grabbed a random client file and pretended to be working on a design project. "Hey, sweetheart," he said, poking his head into the office with the same casual affection he'd used for 15 years. "Still working? It's getting late." I looked up at him, really looked at him, and saw a complete stranger. This man had spent the last year systematically stealing my future while kissing me goodbye every morning. He had planned my financial destruction while asking me to iron his shirts for the office where he was crafting his single-man persona. "Just finishing up," I said, proud of how steady my voice sounded. "How was your call? Work issue?" "Nothing major," he replied with practiced ease. "Just a client with some anxiety about market fluctuations. You know how it is." I knew exactly how it was. But what Gerard didn't know was that his wife, the one he'd already dismissed as gone, was about to show him what market fluctuations really looked like. That night, I lay awake next to Gerard, listening to his peaceful breathing while my mind raced through everything I'd discovered. He slept soundly, probably dreaming about his new life in Boston, completely unaware that his carefully constructed plan was about to encounter its first major obstacle. Me. At 3 a.m., I quietly slipped out of bed and returned to the office. If Gerard could spend a year planning my destruction, I could spend a few hours planning my defense. But as I sat in front of the computer screen, I realized defense wasn't enough. This required offense. I opened a notepad and began writing down everything I knew about Gerard's financial world. Not just our personal accounts, but his professional life at Meridian Wealth Management. 15 years of being the supportive wife meant I knew far, more about his business than he realized. Gerard had always underestimated my intelligence, dismissing my contributions as help with the details. But those details had given me access to information he'd forgotten I possessed. I knew his client list, his business methods, and most importantly, I knew his weaknesses. For instance, I knew that Gerard had a habit of bending rules when it came to client confidentiality. How many times had he come home frustrated about difficult clients and vented to me about their personal financial situations? Mrs. Henderson's messy divorce that was affecting her investment decisions, the Thompson family's tax evasion concerns, Mr. Carlyle's gambling problem that Gerard had to constantly manage around. I also knew that Gerard had been taking liberties with expense accounts for years. Those client dinners that were actually dates with Nadine, the business trips to Boston that were apartment hunting expeditions, the professional development courses that were probably couples getaways, all charged to the company while he simultaneously drained our personal accounts. But my greatest advantage was something Gerard had set up himself. I was an authorized user on his business credit card, with my own card for emergency business expenses when he was traveling. He'd given me access to help manage his calendar and expense reports, never imagining I might use that access against him. As dawn broke, I had filled 3 pages with notes and developed the skeleton of a plan. Gerard wasn't just stealing from me. He was stealing from his employer and possibly his clients. His systematic movement of our money, combined with his fraudulent expense reports, painted a picture of someone willing to commit financial crimes to fund his new life. The beauty of Gerard's arrogance was that he'd left me in charge of our financial records while conducting his secret operations. This meant I had documentation of everything, the legitimate transactions and the questionable ones. I had access to accounts he'd forgotten I could see. Most importantly, I had the ability to create problems in his professional life that would make his personal betrayal look simple by comparison. I realized that Gerard's assumption about my passivity was about to become his greatest liability. He expected me to quietly accept whatever settlement he offered, to be grateful for the security of keeping our house while he walked away with everything else. He thought I would be too emotional, too overwhelmed, too dependent on his goodwill to fight back effectively. He was wrong on every count. My first move was to contact my old college roommate Mary, who had become a forensic accountant specializing in white-collar crime investigations. We hadn't spoken in 2 years, but I knew she worked for a firm that handled corporate fraud cases. "Alexa?" Mary's voice was surprised but warm when she answered her phone at 7 a.m. "This is unexpected. How are you?" "I need professional advice," I said, cutting straight to the point. Hypothetically, if someone discovered that their spouse was systematically moving marital assets, while also submitting fraudulent expense reports to their employer, what would be the most effective way to document and report it? There was a pause. Hypothetically? Mary asked carefully. Hypothetically? I confirmed. Well, hypothetically, that person would want to gather as much documentation as possible before taking any action. Financial crimes leave paper trails, and the more evidence you have, the stronger your position becomes. But Alexa, if this isn't actually hypothetical, if it weren't hypothetical, I said, what would you recommend as the first step? Mary's tone became more serious. Document everything. Bank statements, expense reports, email communications, travel records. Create a timeline showing the pattern of deceptive behavior. And most importantly, don't let the other party know you're investigating until you're ready to act. The element of surprise is crucial in these situations. After hanging up with Mary, I felt the first surge of real confidence I'd experienced since hearing Gerard's phone call. I wasn't just the betrayed wife anymore. I was becoming a strategic opponent. I spent the next week living a double life that rivaled Gerard's. During the day, I maintained my role as the loving, unsuspecting wife. I made his breakfast, kissed him goodbye, asked about his day when he came home. But every moment he was out of the house, I was systematically documenting his crimes. I photographed every document in his Boston transition folder. I printed out bank statements showing the pattern of transferred funds. I created spreadsheets tracking his expense account abuse, cross-referencing his submitted receipts with our personal calendar and credit card statements. The picture that emerged was devastating. Gerard hadn't just stolen $78,000 from our marriage. He'd stolen an additional $23,000 from his employer through fraudulent expense claims. Restaurant bills for client dinners on nights when I knew he was with Nadine. Hotel charges for business trips that coincided with romantic getaways. Even gas charges for trips to Boston that he'd claimed were client visits. But my most damaging discovery came when I accessed his work email account. Gerard had given me his passwords years ago for managing his calendar, and he'd never changed them. What I found in his sent folder was a goldmine of professional misconduct. He'd been sharing confidential client information with Nadine, apparently trying to impress her with stories of wealthy clients and their financial problems. Worse, he'd been using client connections to secure personal benefits, like getting a reference for his Boston apartment from a client who owned property management companies. As I compiled evidence, a plan began forming that was both elegant and devastating. Gerard had built his escape strategy on two assumptions: that I would be too passive to investigate his deception, and that I would be too financially dependent to threaten his professional life. Both assumptions were about to be proven catastrophically wrong. I realized that Gerard's timeline worked in my favor. He wasn't planning to tell me about the divorce until after Christmas, which gave me 6 weeks to position myself perfectly. 6 weeks to document everything, to secure my own financial position, and to prepare a counterattack that would hit him from directions he never saw coming. The irony was perfect. Gerard thought he was playing a long game, carefully positioning himself for maximum advantage. But I was about to turn his own timeline into his downfall. While he was focused on his January divorce announcement, I was preparing to destroy his entire professional life in December. After all, if his wife was already gone, then he had no reason to expect loyalty, discretion, or mercy from the woman who was taking her place. 2 days after my conversation with Mary, I decided to take my investigation to the next level. Gerard's predictable schedule worked in my favor. Every Tuesday, he had lunch meetings that lasted until 3 p.m., giving me a solid 4-hour window to dig deeper into his digital life. I had been conservative in my initial investigation, limiting myself to accounts and files I already knew about. But Gerard's systematic deception had been going on for over a year, which meant there were probably digital footprints I hadn't discovered yet. It was time to stop playing it safe. Gerard's laptop sat in our home office, password protected but not impenetrable. After 15 years of marriage, I knew his patterns. He used variations of the same 3 passwords for everything: our wedding date, his mother's maiden name, and his high school football jersey number. It took me exactly 4 attempts to crack his personal laptop. What I found in his browser history was a masterclass in deception. Gerard had been living a double life so completely that even his online presence was split between married Gerard and single Gerard. His regular browsing showed the usual financial websites, sports news, and work-related research. But his private browsing history, which he'd apparently forgotten to clear, revealed an entirely different person. Dating profiles. Not just one, but 3 different platforms where Gerard had been presenting himself as recently divorced and looking for something serious. His profile pictures were carefully cropped versions of photos I'd taken of him, edited to remove any sign of our life together. In his bio, he described himself as a successful financial advisor who was ready to start the next chapter after an amicable divorce. The audacity was breathtaking. He'd been actively dating other women while planning his future with Nadine, apparently hedging his bets in case their relationship didn't work out. The message threads showed him using identical pickup lines with multiple women, crafting a persona of the thoughtful, successful man who'd learned from his past relationship mistakes. But the most damaging discovery was in his financial planning software. Gerard kept detailed financial projections on his laptop, and what I found there revealed the true scope of his planning. This wasn't just about leaving me. It was about leaving me financially destroyed while he started over with maximum advantage. His spreadsheets showed calculations going back 18 months, long before he'd even met Nadine. He'd been planning an exit strategy from our marriage for longer than I'd realized, systematically determining exactly how much money he could move without triggering my suspicion or legal consequences. The projections were coldly methodical. Column A showed our joint assets. Column B showed what he considered legitimately his, essentially everything. Column C showed what he was willing to leave me: the house with its remaining mortgage payments, my car, and exactly $12,000 in checking account funds. According to Gerard's calculations, this would be enough for me to transition to independent living while he walked away with our entire retirement savings, investment portfolio, and liquid assets. But the most chilling document was titled Risk Assessment, Alexa Response Scenarios. Gerard had actually created a strategic analysis of how I might react to divorce proceedings, rating the likelihood of various responses from passive acceptance, 85% probability, to aggressive legal challenge, 3% probability. Under passive acceptance, he'd written, Alexa has no independent financial knowledge and has been completely dependent on my management of our assets. She trusts my decisions and is unlikely to question generous settlement offer. Probable outcome, grateful acceptance, and minimal legal fees. Under aggressive legal challenge, he'd noted, low probability due to Alexa's non-confrontational personality and lack of financial sophistication. Even if pursued, her ignorance of hidden assets would limit effectiveness of legal discovery. Gerard's work files revealed even more damaging evidence. He'd been using company resources to plan his personal life to an extent that bordered on corporate theft. Company time spent researching Boston real estate. Company computers used to communicate with Nadine during work hours. Company credit cards used for personal expenses that were then disguised as business costs. But the most serious discovery was in his client communication files. Gerard had been sharing confidential client information not just with Nadine, but also with the women from his dating profiles. Screenshots of conversations showed him impressing potential dates with stories about managing high-net-worth portfolios and name-dropping wealthy clients to establish his credibility and success. One conversation with a woman named Sarah from his dating profile was particularly damning. My biggest client just inherited $2.3 million and doesn't know the first thing about investing, Gerard had written. It's like being a financial advisor to a lottery winner. Easy money for me. This violated every professional ethics standard in the financial services industry. Client confidentiality wasn't just a professional courtesy, it was a legal requirement with serious regulatory consequences. My investigation into Nadine Walsh proved equally revealing. A simple social media search showed that she wasn't the innocent victim of a charming married man that I'd initially imagined. Her Facebook profile, which she'd apparently forgotten to make private, showed a pattern of relationships with married men. Photos spanning the past 3 years showed her with at least 4 different men, always at expensive restaurants or luxury hotels. The comments on these photos were telling. Friends would ask about her new guy, and she'd respond with variations of, "He's working through some complications with his ex," or, "We're taking things slow until his situation gets resolved." Nadine Walsh was a professional mistress, someone who specialized in relationships with married men who were planning to leave their wives. The timing of her relationship with Gerard wasn't coincidental. She'd targeted him specifically because he was vulnerable and financially successful. Her LinkedIn profile showed employment at a series of companies that seemed to coincide with her relationship timeline. She would work at a company just long enough to identify potential targets, then move on once those relationships ended. Her current position at Henderson Global wasn't just convenient for Gerard's business interests. It was strategic positioning to monitor his professional activities and maintain leverage over him. As I compiled everything I'd discovered, the full scope of Gerard's deception became clear. This wasn't just marital infidelity or even financial theft. Gerard was conducting a systematic criminal enterprise that included embezzlement from marital assets, corporate fraud through false expense reports, violation of professional ethics through client confidentiality breaches, identity fraud through his false dating profiles, potential securities violations through misuse of client information. More importantly, he was being manipulated by a woman who had made a career out of exploiting men in exactly his position. Nadine wasn't just his accomplice, she was likely his handler, guiding him toward decisions that would maximize her benefit while minimizing her legal exposure. But Gerard's greatest mistake was underestimating me. His risk assessment had failed to consider one crucial factor. What would happen if his passive, financially unsophisticated wife discovered the true scope of his crimes and decided to become his greatest liability? As I organized the evidence into a comprehensive file, I realized that Gerard had inadvertently given me everything I needed to destroy not just his marriage, but his career, his freedom, and his future with Nadine. He'd been so focused on planning his escape that he'd forgotten to cover his tracks. The man who thought his wife was already gone was about to discover that the woman taking her place was far more dangerous than he'd ever imagined. Armed with devastating evidence of Gerard's crimes, I knew that simply confronting him or filing for divorce wouldn't be enough. He had spent over a year methodically destroying my financial security while building his escape plan. It was time to return the favor with interest. My strategy needed to be as calculated and systematic as his betrayal had been. Gerard's greatest weakness was his arrogance. He truly believed I was too passive and financially ignorant to threaten him. That misconception was about to become his downfall. My first strike was subtle but devastating. Gerard had moved our money into accounts he thought I couldn't access, but he'd forgotten one crucial detail. I was still a joint owner on our primary savings account, which meant I could legally withdraw funds without his permission or knowledge. Over 3 days, I systematically moved $45,000 from our joint savings into a new account at a different bank, money that Gerard had been planning to transfer to his Boston nest egg the following week. I timed the withdrawals perfectly with his schedule, making them during his client meetings when he wouldn't be checking account balances. But I didn't just move the money, I invested it strategically. Using knowledge I'd gained from 15 years of listening to Gerard discuss investment strategies, I placed the funds in a mix of CDs and high-yield savings accounts that would be difficult to trace and impossible for him to access, even with a court order for at least 6 months. My second move targeted Gerard's professional life. I knew from his communications that his career advancement depended heavily on landing the Hartwell account, the commission he was counting on to fund his new life with Nadine. What Gerard didn't know was that I had indirect connections to the Hartwell family through my design work. 3 years ago, I had designed wedding invitations for Jennifer Hartwell's daughter. We'd stayed in touch through social media, and she'd occasionally referred other clients to me. It was time to leverage that relationship. I crafted a careful message to Jennifer, framing it as a concerned friend sharing important information about her family's financial advisor. I attached carefully selected evidence of Gerard's professional misconduct, his sharing of client confidentiality information, his fraudulent expense reports, and his violation of industry ethics standards. I felt you should be aware of some concerning behavior I've discovered, I wrote. As someone who's trusted Gerard with my family's financial future, I thought you'd want to know about these practices before making any major investment decisions. The response came within hours. Jennifer was horrified to learn that Gerard had been discussing client information with dating prospects and using company resources for personal gain. She immediately contacted other family members who were also considering investment with Meridian Wealth Management. My most sophisticated move involved Gerard's dating profiles. Since he'd been presenting himself as divorced and available, I decided to help him live that reality sooner than he'd planned. Using a fake profile, I began conversations with Gerard on 2 of his dating platforms. I created the persona of Michelle, a successful marketing executive who was exactly Gerard's type, financially independent, attractive, and interested in serious relationships with professional men. The conversations revealed Gerard's standard playbook for seducing women. He used identical pickup lines, told the same fabricated stories about his amicable divorce, and made the same promises about being ready for commitment. But most importantly, he began sharing details about his work and his financial situation that I could use against him. Within a week, Michelle had extracted information about Gerard's client list, his commission structure, and his plans to relocate to Boston. He was so eager to impress this fictional woman that he violated client confidentiality repeatedly, giving me documented evidence of professional misconduct that went far beyond what I'd already discovered. While Gerard was unknowingly incriminating himself with Michelle, I was conducting a deeper investigation into Nadine Walsh. Her pattern of targeting married men suggested she might have legal vulnerabilities that could be exploited. I discovered that Nadine's previous relationships had ended badly, with at least 2 men filing harassment complaints against her when they tried to reconcile with their wives instead of leaving them. More importantly, her employment history showed a pattern of leaving jobs under suspicious circumstances, often coinciding with the end of her relationships. A careful review of public records revealed that Nadine had been involved in a lawsuit 2 years ago, accused of intentionally interfering with a marriage and contributing to a divorce that cost her target his custody rights with his children. The case had been settled out of court, but the allegations painted a picture of someone who used manipulation and threats to maintain control over her targets. The most elegant part of my strategy was using Gerard's own timeline against him. He was planning to wait until after Christmas to announce his divorce plans, assuming this would give him maximum advantage in settlement negotiations. But I was about to flip that script entirely. By accelerating the revelation of his crimes, I could force him into defensive mode before he was ready to execute his escape plan. The Hartwell account withdrawal would cost him his expected commission. The dating profile evidence would destroy his credibility. The financial moves I'd made would leave him scrambling to explain missing money to his new bank and his girlfriend. But the masterstroke was the timing. Gerard's annual performance review at Meridian was scheduled for December 15th. If I could ensure that his professional misconduct was discovered just before that review, It would not only cost him his job, but also trigger an industry investigation that would follow him anywhere he tried to work in financial services. As November turned to December, I watched Gerard continue his normal routine, completely unaware that his carefully constructed plan was crumbling around him. He still made his secret phone calls to Nadine, still worked on his Boston transition plans, still treated me like the passive, ignorant wife he expected to discard. But behind the scenes, the seeds I'd planted were beginning to sprout. The Hartwell family was quietly conducting their own investigation into Gerard's practices. His employer was starting to notice irregularities in his expense reports. His mysterious new dating prospects were extracting damaging admissions that would soon be delivered to the appropriate authorities. Most importantly, Gerard's missing money was about to be discovered. And when it was, he would realize that his greatest mistake hadn't been underestimating his wife's intelligence. It had been underestimating her capacity for revenge. December 3rd was the day Gerard's carefully constructed world began to crumble, though he didn't immediately understand what was happening. It started with a phone call that I heard from our kitchen while he was getting dressed for work. "What do you mean they're reconsidering?" Gerard's voice carried down the hallway, sharp with confusion and rising panic. "I've been working on the Hartwell account for 8 months. The paperwork is ready to finalize." I continued making breakfast, listening as his conversation grew more heated. Through his responses, I could piece together that Jennifer Hartwell had contacted Meridian Wealth Management directly, expressing concerns about Gerard's professional conduct and requesting a different advisor for her family's portfolio. "That's impossible," Gerard was saying. "Jennifer and I have an excellent relationship. There must be some misunderstanding." But there was no misunderstanding. The seeds I'd planted were beginning to bloom exactly as I'd planned. Gerard came down to breakfast looking shaken, his usual morning confidence replaced by visible anxiety. He kept checking his phone, probably hoping for some clarification from his supervisor about the Hartwell situation. "Everything okay, honey?" I asked, pouring his coffee with the same loving attention I'd shown for 15 years. "Just some client confusion," he said, but his voice lacked conviction. "Nothing I can't handle." I nodded sympathetically, playing the supportive wife role while internally celebrating the first major blow to his financial escape plan. The Hartwell commission had been worth approximately $85,000, money Gerard was counting on for his Boston down payment and his new life with Nadine. Over the next few days, Gerard's stress became increasingly visible. He started working later, making more frequent phone calls, and spending hours on his laptop trying to salvage client relationships that were mysteriously souring. What he didn't realize was that the Hartwell family had quietly reached out to other wealthy families in their social circle, sharing their concerns about Gerard's conduct. Word travels fast in wealthy social networks, and Gerard's reputation was becoming toxic without him understanding why. December 8th brought the second major shock. I was in the garden when I heard Gerard's voice explode from the office, a string of profanity that echoed through our normally quiet house. He'd finally noticed the missing $45,000. I calmly continued pruning our rose bushes while listening to him frantically call the bank, demanding to know how money had been transferred from our joint account without his knowledge. The bank politely informed him that as joint account holders, either party could initiate transfers, and all transactions had been conducted legally with proper authorization. "Alexa." Gerard's voice was tight with controlled panic as he called for me from the office. "We need to talk." I took my time removing my gardening gloves, arranging my tools, and washing my hands before joining him. Gerard sat at our desk, bank statements spread before him, his face pale with shock and growing anger. "Did you move money from our savings account?" he asked, his voice carefully modulated but his eyes searching my face for deception. "Of course," I replied calmly. "You've been handling all our investment decisions lately, and I thought it was time I took a more active role in managing our finances. I moved some funds into higher yield accounts." Gerard's expression shifted as he processed this. His wife, the passive, financially ignorant woman he'd been planning to abandon, had just outmaneuvered him using his own strategies. "Which accounts?" he asked, and I could hear the effort it took to keep his voice level. "Several different ones," I said with a smile. "I did quite a bit of research on investment options. I'm learning so much about financial planning these days." December 10th brought Gerard's worst nightmare, a meeting with his supervisor at Meridian about irregularities in client accounts and expense reporting. He left for work that morning looking like a man walking to his execution. The call came at 2 p.m. Gerard's voice was shaky as he told me he'd been placed on administrative leave pending a full investigation into his professional conduct. Someone had filed complaints about his sharing of confidential client information and his misuse of company resources. "Who would do this?" he asked, and for the first time since I'd discovered his betrayal, I heard genuine fear in his voice. "Someone's been sabotaging me, Alexa. Someone has access to my communications, my expense reports, everything." I made sympathetic noises while privately marveling at how a man who'd spent over a year planning his wife's financial destruction could sound so wounded by the consequences of his own actions. The final blow of that devastating week came when Gerard discovered that his dating profiles had been screenshotted and were being circulated among his professional contacts. The fake Michelle account had done its job perfectly, extracting admissions of professional misconduct that were now being shared with Meridian's compliance department. Gerard spent hours that evening frantically deleting his profiles and trying to contact the women he'd been corresponding with, begging them to remove any screenshots they might have taken. But the damage was done. His colleagues now knew that their happily married coworker had been actively seeking new relationships while sharing confidential client information to impress potential dates. "Someone's been catfishing me," Gerard told me that evening, his voice hollow with disbelief. "They created fake profiles to trick me into saying things that could destroy my career." "That's terrible," I replied, genuinely impressed by how effectively my strategy had worked. "Who would go to such lengths to hurt you?" It was December 12th when Gerard finally began to suspect that his problems weren't coincidental. He'd been reviewing the timeline of his disasters: the Hartwell withdrawal, the missing money, the professional investigation, the dating profile leak, and the pattern was too coordinated to be random. "Alexa," he said that evening, his voice careful and measured, "I need to ask you something. And I need you to be completely honest with me." I looked up from my book, maintaining the expression of mild curiosity I'd perfected over the past weeks. "Have you been going through my personal files? My computer? My emails? Anything like that?" "Why would I do that?" I asked, letting just the right amount of hurt creep into my voice. "Gerard, we're married. I trust you completely." But I could see in his eyes that doubt was finally taking root. The passive, trusting wife he'd taken for granted was beginning to look like a potential threat. For the first time in our marriage, Gerard was seeing me as someone capable of strategic thinking and decisive action. He just didn't realize yet how much strategic thinking I'd been doing, or how decisive my actions were about to become. The next morning, I made the most important phone call of this entire ordeal. Mary had been waiting for my update, and it was time to move from reconnaissance to active warfare. "I need to meet with you," I told her over the burner phone I'd purchased specifically for this conversation. "And I need to bring everything I've discovered. It's bigger than we thought." We arranged to meet at a coffee shop in Hartford, far enough from Westfield that we wouldn't accidentally encounter anyone from Gerard's professional or social circles. When Mary saw the thickness of the folder I carried, her forensic accountant instincts immediately kicked in. "How much evidence are we talking about?" she asked as we settled into a corner booth. "Enough to destroy him completely," I replied, spreading the documents across the table. "But I need to know the best way to do it legally." Mary's expression grew more serious as she reviewed each piece of evidence. The fraudulent expense reports, the client confidentiality violations, the systematic theft of marital assets. Each document confirmed that Gerard had crossed from personal betrayal into criminal territory. "Alexa, this isn't just about divorce anymore," Mary said quietly. "Your husband has committed multiple felonies. The SEC, the IRS, and probably the FBI would all be interested in this evidence." She explained that financial advisors operate under strict regulatory oversight, and Gerard's violations could result in criminal charges, not just professional sanctions. The client confidentiality breaches alone could cost him his licenses permanently, but combined with the expense account fraud and the systematic hiding of assets, he was looking at potential jail time. "But here's what you need to understand," Mary continued. "Once we report this to the authorities, you lose control of the timeline. This becomes a criminal investigation, and Gerard will know immediately that someone provided evidence against him. I had been prepared for this moment." "What if we don't report it all at once?" Mary raised an eyebrow. "What do you mean?" "What? If we report different violations to different agencies, spread over time, make it look like multiple people discovered his misconduct independently?" Mary's expertise proved invaluable as we developed a multi-pronged approach that would maximize Gerard's legal exposure while protecting my interests in the divorce proceedings. First, we would report the SEC violations anonymously, focusing on his client confidentiality breaches and professional misconduct. This would trigger an industry investigation that would likely result in Gerard losing his licenses and being banned from the financial services industry. Second, we would provide the IRS with evidence of his fraudulent business expense deductions. Tax fraud carries serious penalties, and the IRS has broad powers to freeze assets and pursue criminal charges. Third, we would report the corporate fraud to Meridian Wealth Management's compliance department, but in a way that appeared to come from concerned clients rather than from me directly. The beauty of this approach, Mary explained, is that each agency will conduct its own investigation independently. Gerard won't be able to defend against all of them simultaneously, and the overlapping investigations will reinforce each other. Mary recommended a divorce attorney who specialized in high-asset cases involving financial crimes. "You need someone who understands both family law and white-collar criminal defense," she explained. "Someone who can protect your interests while these investigations proceed." The attorney, Patricia Hendricks, had a reputation for representing wives whose husbands had hidden assets or committed financial crimes. When I met with her the following day, she immediately grasped the complexity of my situation. "Your husband has made several critical mistakes," Patricia observed after reviewing my evidence. "He's created a paper trail that clearly establishes intent to defraud you of marital assets. But more importantly, he's committed crimes that give us leverage in settlement negotiations." Patricia explained that in Connecticut, courts could award a greater share of marital assets to the innocent spouse when the other party had engaged in financial misconduct. But she also warned me about the risks of proceeding with criminal referrals. Once Gerard is under criminal investigation, he'll likely become more defensive and less willing to negotiate, she said. "We need to be prepared for him to fight dirty." During our meeting, I shared my research on Nadine Walsh and her pattern of targeting married men. Patricia's expression darkened as she reviewed the evidence of Nadine's previous relationships and legal troubles. "This woman is more than just a mistress," Patricia concluded. "She's potentially an accomplice in your husband's financial crimes. Her employment at Henderson Global, combined with her history of manipulating married men, suggests this relationship was planned strategically." Patricia recommended that we investigate whether Nadine had been instrumental in Gerard's decision to begin moving assets. If we could prove that she had encouraged or assisted in his financial deception, she could be held liable for contributing to the damage to our marriage. "Alienation of affection cases are difficult to prove," Patricia explained. "But when there's evidence of financial conspiracy, the courts take a much dimmer view of the third party's behavior. Perhaps most importantly, Patricia recommended that I undergo a psychological evaluation to document the emotional trauma of Gerard's betrayal. This would serve two purposes. It would establish my mental state for the divorce proceedings, and it would create a professional record of how Gerard's systematic deception had affected my well-being. The courts are increasingly recognizing financial abuse as a form of domestic violence, Patricia explained. Your husband didn't just cheat on you. He systematically planned to destroy your financial security while lying to your face for over a year. That's psychological torture. The evaluation revealed what I already knew, but couldn't have articulated professionally. Gerard's betrayal had been a calculated campaign of financial and emotional abuse designed to leave me helpless and dependent on his mercy. The psychologist documented symptoms of complex trauma resulting from sustained deception and financial manipulation. As December progressed, Mary and Patricia helped me coordinate the release of evidence to various agencies. The SEC complaint was filed first, focusing solely on Gerard's professional misconduct. 3 days later, an anonymous tip to the IRS highlighted his fraudulent business expenses. A week after that, concerned clients contacted Meridian's compliance department about Gerard's sharing of confidential information. Each report appeared to come from different sources and focused on different aspects of Gerard's misconduct. To outside observers, it looked like Gerard's crimes were being discovered independently by multiple parties. Only I knew that every piece of evidence had been carefully coordinated to create maximum pressure on his legal and professional position. Mary also insisted that I build a personal support network beyond just legal and financial advisors. You're about to go through a very public and very ugly situation, she warned. Gerard is going to realize soon that you're not the passive victim he expected, and his reaction could be unpredictable. She helped me reconnect with old friends I'd lost touch with during my marriage, women who had known me before I became Gerard's accommodating wife. Their support reminded me of who I had been before 15 years of being dismissed and underestimated had eroded my confidence. As the evidence mounted and the investigations began, I felt something I hadn't experienced in years. The power that comes from being taken seriously, being believed, and being supported by people who recognized that I deserved better than what Gerard had planned for me. December 15th brought revelations that shattered everything I thought I knew about Gerard's betrayal. What I had discovered wasn't just a midlife crisis or even a calculated affair. It was part of a sophisticated financial conspiracy that reached far beyond our marriage. The breakthrough came when Mary's investigation into Nadine Walsh uncovered connections that turned my blood cold. Nadine hadn't just targeted Gerard randomly. She was part of an organized network that specialized in identifying and exploiting financially successful married men. Mary had traced Nadine's employment history through 3 different states and discovered a pattern that was both brilliant and terrifying. Nadine worked for companies that provided services to wealth management firms, HR consulting, compliance training, corporate event planning. Each position gave her access to employee information at financial services companies, allowing her to identify targets with significant assets and vulnerable personal situations. She's not working alone, Mary explained as we reviewed her findings in Patricia's law office. There are at least 4 other women using similar strategies across New England. They share information about targets, coordinate timing to avoid overlap, and even have legal support when things go wrong. The network had been operating for at least 6 years, with documented cases of at least 15 successful extractions. Men who had started as targets ended up divorced, financially devastated, and often facing criminal charges, while the women disappeared with substantial settlements or outright theft of assets. But Gerard's case was different. He wasn't just a victim, he was a willing participant. The most shocking discovery came from Gerard's own communications, which Mary had been able to access through legal channels once Patricia filed preliminary divorce papers. Gerard had known, about Nadine's background from the beginning of their relationship. Email threads dating back 14 months showed that Gerard had actually sought out Nadine's services. He'd contacted her through a private referral network after meeting a recently divorced colleague who bragged about how his relationship consultant had helped him optimize his exit strategy from his marriage. She's like a divorce strategist. Gerard had written to a friend. She helps you position everything so you come out ahead financially and emotionally. The wife never sees it coming because it looks like a genuine relationship. Gerard had paid Nadine a $15,000 retainer fee for her services, with an additional $50,000 bonus contingent on successful completion of his divorce with maximum asset retention. She wasn't his girlfriend. She was his hired accomplice in the systematic destruction of our marriage. The conspiracy extended beyond just Nadine's services. Her position at Henderson Global wasn't coincidental either. The company had been specifically targeting Gerard as a business partner because of his client base and his willingness to bend ethical rules. Henderson Global operated in a legal gray area, providing investment opportunities that skirted regulatory oversight. They needed financial advisors who could bring them wealthy clients while maintaining plausible deniability about the questionable nature of their investment products. Gerard's communications revealed that he'd been funneling client money into Henderson Global Investments for months, earning substantial undisclosed commissions while exposing his clients to potentially fraudulent schemes. The Hartwell account wasn't just a legitimate investment opportunity. It was Gerard's entry point into a much larger criminal enterprise. As Patricia and Mary pieced together the full timeline, the scope of Gerard's betrayal became staggering. 18 months ago, Gerard had begun having financial difficulties due to some failed personal investments. Rather than admit his mistakes to me, he'd started looking for ways to recover his losses without my knowledge. 14 months ago, he'd made contact with Nadine's network and hired her to help him plan an exit strategy that would leave him with maximum assets and minimum legal exposure. 12 months ago, he'd begun the systematic transfer of our joint assets while Nadine coached him on maintaining the appearance of a normal marriage. 8 months ago, he'd started working with Henderson Global, using our clients' money to fund increasingly risky investments that generated high commissions but exposed the clients to substantial losses. 6 months ago, he'd finalized his plans to relocate to Boston, with Nadine's network providing him with new identity documents and financial accounts that would be difficult to trace. Most disturbing was the discovery that Gerard and I weren't the only victims. Henderson Global's client list included several of Gerard's investors who had been systematically defrauded over the past year. Elderly clients had seen their retirement savings disappear into questionable investments. Young families had lost college funds to schemes that promised guaranteed returns but delivered only losses. Gerard hadn't just betrayed his wife. He'd betrayed every client who had trusted him with their financial future. The man I'd been married to for 15 years had become a predator who targeted the most vulnerable people in his professional circle. The most chilling discovery was how Nadine protected herself from legal consequences. She maintained detailed records of every client Gerard defrauded, every ethical violation he committed, and every illegal transaction he conducted. If Gerard ever tried to betray her or reduce her payments, she had enough evidence to destroy him completely. But the records also showed that Nadine had been reporting Gerard's activities to unknown third parties, providing updates on his progress and requesting guidance on strategy. She wasn't just working with Gerard. She was working for someone else, someone who remained hidden behind layers of corporate entities and legal protection. As the full scope of the conspiracy became clear, Patricia's expression grew increasingly grim. "Alexa, your husband isn't just a cheating spouse or even a white-collar criminal. He's part of an organized network that's been systematically targeting successful professionals and their families." She explained that the network appeared to be connected to larger money laundering operations, using the divorce and asset transfer process to clean illegally obtained funds. Gerard's role was to identify wealthy clients who could be exploited, while Nadine's role was to ensure that the divorces proceeded smoothly and that assets ended up in accounts controlled by the network. The good news, Patricia continued, is that this makes Gerard far more vulnerable than we initially realized. The federal agencies investigating financial networks like this have significant resources and broad authority to freeze assets and pursue criminal charges. But Mary warned me about the dangers of being connected to such a large criminal investigation. Once the federal agencies get involved, your safety could be at risk. These networks don't just lose money when they're exposed, they lose their entire operation. The network had invested significant resources in Gerard's case, and my interference had already cost them hundreds of thousands of dollars in lost commissions and failed schemes. If they perceived me as a threat to their broader operation, they might take action to protect their interests. As I absorbed the magnitude of what I'd uncovered, I realized that my personal revenge against Gerard had accidentally exposed a criminal enterprise that had been destroying families across multiple states for years. The passive wife who just wanted justice for her betrayal had become the biggest threat to a sophisticated criminal network, and they were about to find out just how much damage one angry woman with the right evidence could do. December 18th marked the day my carefully orchestrated plan went from psychological warfare to physical threat. I was leaving Patricia's law office after reviewing the latest federal investigation updates when I noticed the black sedan that had been parked across from our house that morning was now sitting in the parking garage. The same car. The same two. Men in business suits. Following me. My hands trembled as I called Mary from my car, doors locked and engine running. "I think I'm being watched," I whispered into the phone. "Where are you?" Mary's voice was immediately alert and professional. "Downtown Hartford, the parking garage by Patricia's office. There's a black sedan that's been following me since this morning." "Don't go home," Mary said firmly. "Drive to the police station on Main Street. I'll meet you there in 20 minutes. At Highs, the police station, Mary arrived with someone I hadn't expected. Agent Arthur Caldwell from the FBI's Financial Crimes Unit. His presence confirmed what I'd been afraid to fully acknowledge. I had stumbled into something far more dangerous than marital revenge. "Mrs. Simon," Agent Caldwell said as we settled into a private interview room, "your evidence about Gerard's activities has opened a federal investigation into a criminal network we've been tracking for 3 years." He explained that the network Nadine worked for was part of a sophisticated money laundering operation that used divorce proceedings to clean millions of dollars in illegally obtained funds. My documentation of Gerard's crimes had provided the missing links they needed to understand how the network operated. "The good news is that your evidence is going to help us shut down an operation that's been destroying families across 6 states," Agent Caldwell continued. "The bad news is that you're now a material witness in a federal investigation, and these people have significant resources to protect their interests. The men following me weren't just intimidation, they were conducting surveillance to determine how much I knew and who I'd shared information with. The network was assessing whether I was a manageable problem or a threat that required more direct action. Agent Caldwell arranged for immediate protective surveillance, which sounded reassuring until he explained what it actually meant. Federal. Agents would monitor my house and follow me during daily activities, but they couldn't provide round-the-clock personal protection unless there was evidence of immediate physical threat. "We're going to accelerate our timeline," he said. "The network knows their operation is compromised, and they're likely to start destroying evidence and eliminating witnesses. We need to move on Gerard and his associates within the next week." This meant that Gerard would soon discover that his wife, the passive, ignorant woman he'd planned to discard, had single-handedly exposed a criminal enterprise that stretched across multiple states and involved millions of dollars in fraudulent transactions. His reaction was going to be unpredictable and potentially violent. That evening, Gerard's behavior confirmed that the pressure was reaching a breaking point. He spent hours on the phone speaking in hushed, urgent tones. I caught fragments of conversations that revealed his growing panic. "She knows something," he said during one call. "The timing is too perfect. Someone's been feeding information to the feds." Later that night, I heard him in the office, frantically shredding documents and clearing files from his computer. The methodical, confident man who had planned my financial destruction was becoming erratic and desperate. Around midnight, he confronted me directly for the first time. "Alexa," he said, standing in our bedroom doorway with an expression I'd never seen before, equal parts fury and fear. "I know you've been going through my things. I know you took money from our accounts. What I don't know is how far this goes." I sat up in bed, my heart pounding but my voice steady. "I don't know what you're talking about, Gerard." "Don't lie to me," he hissed, stepping closer. "The feds are sniffing around my business. My clients are dropping me. Someone has been systematically destroying my life, and I think it's you." For the first time since this began, I felt genuine fear. Gerard's mask of civilized businessman had slipped, revealing something cold and potentially dangerous underneath. Gerard sat heavily on the edge of our bed, his voice dropping to a whisper that was more menacing than shouting would have been. "Here's what's going to happen," he said. "You're going to tell me exactly what you've done, who you've talked to, and what evidence you think you have. Then you're going to help me fix this mess." He leaned closer, his breath hot against my face. "Because if I go down, Alexa, I'm taking you with me. I've got documentation showing that you were involved in moving money between accounts. Your signatures are on forms you didn't read carefully. As far as anyone can prove, you were my accomplice, not my victim." The threat was clear. Cooperate or face criminal charges as his co-conspirator. Gerard had apparently been preparing for this possibility, creating paper trails that could implicate me in his crimes if necessary. "I can make this go away," he continued. "I can protect you from the federal investigation, but only if you help me protect myself. Otherwise, we both go to prison and you lose everything anyway." After Gerard left for another emergency phone call, I sat in our bedroom, finally understanding the full scope of the danger I was in. I hadn't just exposed Gerard's crimes. I'd made myself a target of a criminal network with the resources and motivation to eliminate threats. But Gerard had also revealed his greatest weakness. He was terrified. The confident, methodical man who had planned my destruction was now scrambling to save himself, making mistakes and exposing vulnerabilities that I could exploit. I called Mary on my burner phone from the bathroom with the shower running to mask. The sound. "Gerard knows," I whispered. "He's threatening to frame me as his accomplice." "How much does he know about the federal investigation?" Mary asked. "He knows the FBI is involved, but he doesn't know about the bigger network. He thinks this is just about him." "Good," Mary said. "That gives us leverage. Agent Caldwell wants to offer Gerard a deal. Full cooperation in exchange for reduced charges. But we need you to be the one to propose it." "You want me to flip him?" "We want you to make him think that cooperating with the investigation is his idea. If he believes he can save himself by betraying his associates, he'll give us everything we need to take down the entire network." As I returned to our bedroom, where Gerard sat hunched over his laptop, desperately trying to contact his criminal associates, I realized that this was the moment where everything would be decided. The passive wife he'd dismissed was about to offer him his only chance at survival. But Gerard didn't know that the deal would ultimately destroy not just his freedom, but his relationship with Nadine, and any hope of the life he'd planned in Boston. He thought he was negotiating with the same naive woman he'd been manipulating for 15 years. He had no idea he was facing someone who had spent months learning to think like the criminal he'd become. And in a few minutes, Gerard was going to discover that his greatest mistake hadn't been underestimating his wife's intelligence. It had been teaching her exactly how ruthless she could be when someone threatened everything she cared about. Dr. Fee. Next morning brought an unexpected visitor that changed everything. I was making coffee when the doorbell rang at 7 a.m., and through the peephole, I saw a very pregnant woman who looked terrified and exhausted. Nadine Walsh stood on my doorstep. Her designer clothes wrinkled, her makeup smeared, and her hands visibly shaking. "Please," she said when I opened the door. "I need to talk to you. They're going to kill us both." Against every instinct screaming in my head, I let her in. The woman who had been instrumental in destroying my marriage collapsed onto my couch and began sobbing with a desperation that seemed genuine. "Gerard thinks you're the only one who exposed him," Nadine said between gasps. "But he's wrong. The network has been planning to eliminate both of you since last week." Nadine's story shattered my understanding of the criminal conspiracy. She hadn't been a willing participant in a sophisticated operation. She'd been a victim who had been trapped in an increasingly dangerous situation. "I thought I was just helping men leave unhappy marriages," she said, her voice hollow. "I thought I was providing a service, like a discreet divorce consultant. I never knew about the money laundering or the client fraud until it was too late." The network had recruited Nadine when she was vulnerable after her own abusive divorce, offering her financial security and what seemed like legitimate work. But once she was involved, they used threats against her family to ensure her cooperation. "They have photographs of my sister's children," Nadine whispered. "They know where my parents live. When I tried to quit after my first case, they made it clear that leaving wasn't an option. The pregnancy wasn't part of their plan. It was Nadine's desperate attempt to create leverage for herself. She thought having Gerard's child would give her protection within the network and a way to secure her future. But the most shocking revelation was that Gerard had been planning to betray both Nadine and the network from the beginning. His Boston relocation wasn't just about starting a new life. It was about disappearing with millions of dollars that belonged to his criminal associates. "He's been moving their money into accounts they don't know about," Nadine explained. "The Henderson Global Commissions, the client funds he diverted. He was planning to steal everything and disappear. The network found out 3 days ago. Gerard's sudden desperation and threats against me weren't just about the federal investigation. He was racing against time before his criminal associates realized he'd been systematically robbing them while using his relationship with Nadine as cover." Nadine's story unfolded. I realized that despite everything she'd done to my marriage, we now shared the same enemy. Gerard had manipulated both of us, and the network wanted both of us eliminated before we could expose their operations or recover the money Gerard had stolen. "The men following you aren't just surveillance," Nadine said urgently. "They're waiting for orders. If Gerard doesn't cooperate with their damage control plan, they'll eliminate everyone who knows about the operation." She pulled out her phone and showed me messages that made my blood run cold. Instructions about cleaning up loose ends and minimizing exposure. References to previous cases where problems had been resolved permanently. Despite the surreal nature of forming an alliance with the woman who had helped destroy my marriage, the mathematics were simple. Together, we might survive what was coming. Separately, we were both dead. "I have evidence," Nadine said. "Financial records, communications, documentation of everything the network has done. I've been keeping insurance files since my second case, trying to protect myself." Combined with my evidence about Gerard's crimes and the FBI's investigation, Nadine's files could completely expose the network's operations. But we needed to coordinate our approach carefully to avoid triggering the violent response we both feared. We had one advantage. Gerard didn't know that Nadine and I were now working together. He thought he could play us against each other, using threats against me to control the investigation while using Nadine's pregnancy to maintain her cooperation. But if we could present a united front to Agent Caldwell, we could offer the FBI something more valuable than just Gerard's testimony. We could give them the complete network operations, including the evidence they needed to make arrests before anyone else was killed. As my former rival sat in my living room, both of us united by fear and determination, I realized that Gerard's greatest mistake hadn't been underestimating one woman. He'd underestimated two women, who now had every reason to ensure his complete destruction. December 21st was the day all my carefully planted seeds bloomed into a devastating harvest that destroyed Gerard's world from every direction simultaneously. It started at 6 a.m. when Agent Caldwell executed coordinated raids on Henderson, Global's offices in 3 states. By 7 a.m., Gerard's phone was ringing with panicked calls from associates who were being arrested. By 8 a.m., Meridian Wealth Management had frozen all of Gerard's accounts and terminated him immediately to avoid regulatory sanctions. I watched it all unfold from my kitchen window while making coffee, Nadine sitting across from me with her own cup, both of us monitoring news reports and federal communications that Mary had arranged for us to receive. The fake dating profile evidence I had planted months earlier was simultaneously delivered to the Connecticut State Banking Commission, triggering an immediate investigation into Gerard's professional licenses. The client confidentiality violations I had documented were reported to the SEC, resulting in emergency asset freezes on all accounts Gerard had access to. Most devastating was the evidence of his stolen funds from the criminal network. When the FBI raided the Henderson Global offices, they discovered that Gerard had siphoned over $2.3 million from accounts that belonged to his criminal associates, money that was supposed to be laundered through legitimate divorce settlements, but had instead been redirected to Gerard's personal escape fund. The network's reaction was swift and terrifying. By noon, Gerard received a text message that made him collapse onto our couch. "You have 24 hours to return what you stole, or we resolve this permanently." When Gerard realized the scope of his exposure, his carefully maintained facade crumbled completely. The confident financial advisor who had spent over a year planning my destruction became a panicked, desperate man who couldn't understand how his perfect plan had imploded so catastrophically. "How did they find everything?" he kept asking, pacing our living room while making frantic phone calls to lawyers who were no longer taking his calls. Someone had access to files that were encrypted. Someone knew about accounts that were supposed to be secret. He looked at me with growing suspicion, but I maintained the same confused, supportive expression I'd perfected over months of deception. "I don't understand any of this, Gerard. Can you explain what's happening?" But Gerard was beyond explanations. He was fighting for his life on multiple fronts: federal criminal charges, state regulatory violations, civil lawsuits from defrauded clients, and death threats from the criminal network he'd betrayed. At 3 p.m., 2 men arrived at our house. Not the surveillance team that had been following me, but professional enforcers who walked through our front door as if they owned it. Nadine and I were hidden in the basement, watching through security cameras Mary had helped us install. "Gerard," one of them said, his voice calm and matter-of-fact, "you have something that belongs to our employers. We're here to collect it." "I don't have access to those accounts anymore," Gerard replied, his voice shaking. "The feds froze everything. I can't get the money even if I wanted to." "That's unfortunate," the second man said, "because our employers aren't interested in federal complications. They want their money, or they want equivalent compensation in other forms." The threat was clear. If Gerard couldn't return the stolen money, they would collect the debt by taking everything else he owned, including his life. What Gerard didn't know was that FBI agents were recording everything from unmarked vehicles parked throughout our neighborhood. The network's decision to send enforcers to our house had given federal agents the evidence they needed to make arrests for extortion, money laundering, and criminal conspiracy. At 4 p.m., Agent Caldwell's team moved in. The enforcers were arrested in our driveway. Gerard was taken into custody as both a victim of extortion and a perpetrator of financial crimes. The carefully coordinated operation that Nadine and I had helped design was proceeding exactly as planned. As Gerard was being read his rights in our living room, Agent Caldwell looked at me with something approaching admiration. "Mrs. Simon, your evidence has allowed us to arrest the leadership of a criminal network that's been operating for 8 years. 14 people are in custody, and we've recovered over $12 million in stolen assets." Gerard's expression shifted as he finally understood what had happened. The passive, naive wife he'd planned to abandon had orchestrated the complete destruction of his criminal enterprise. Every piece of evidence, every anonymous tip, every perfectly timed revelation had been part of a coordinated campaign that turned his own methods against him. "You," he whispered, staring at me as the handcuffs clicked into place. "You did this. All of it." I met his eyes directly for the first time in months. "You said your wife was already gone, Gerard. You were right, but you should have asked who was taking her place." As Agent Caldwell led Gerard toward the door, I realized that my systematic revenge had achieved something far beyond personal satisfaction. I had dismantled a criminal network, recovered millions in stolen assets, and ensured that Gerard would face justice for every crime he'd committed against me and countless other victims. 6 months later, I stood in the courtroom as Judge Harrison delivered Gerard's sentence: 12 years in federal prison for money laundering, client fraud, and conspiracy. The man who had planned to discard me after 15 years of marriage was being discarded by society for the remainder of his productive life. Nadine sat beside me, her baby girl sleeping peacefully in her arms. The little one would grow up knowing her father only through prison visits and monitored phone calls, a consequence of Gerard's choices that would echo through generations. The defendant showed a callous disregard for the trust placed in him by clients, colleagues, and family members, Judge Harrison said, looking directly at Gerard. His systematic deception and financial crimes have destroyed lives and betrayed every professional and personal relationship he claimed to value. Gerard never looked back at us as he was led away in handcuffs. The confident, controlling man who had told Nadine that his wife was already gone had become a broken figure who understood too late that his greatest mistake was underestimating the woman he'd planned to abandon. The divorce settlement exceeded even Patricia's most optimistic projections. Since Gerard had systematically hidden marital assets while planning to defraud me, the court awarded me 85% of everything we'd built together, including assets I hadn't even known existed. The $45,000 I had moved to protect myself became $850,000 in recovered funds that Gerard had stolen from our marriage. The house was mine, free and clear. The retirement accounts he'd thought he could steal became the foundation of my genuine financial independence. But the most satisfying element was the restitution order. Gerard would be required to pay damages to every client he'd defrauded, every investor he'd misled, and every family he'd destroyed through his criminal activities. His earnings in prison, roughly $0.20 per hour for laundry duty, would be garnished for victim compensation for the rest of his life. Agent Caldwell kept me updated on the network's dismantling. 14 arrests led to 47 additional charges as investigators unraveled the full scope of the operation. The FBI had recovered over $18 million in stolen assets and identified 63 families who had been targeted by similar schemes. Nadine's testimony had been crucial in exposing how the network recruited and controlled women, leading to enhanced penalties for human trafficking and coercion. Several other women trapped in similar situations had been able to escape and rebuild their lives with witness protection support. The case became a landmark prosecution that changed how federal agencies investigate financial crimes involving domestic relationships. Law enforcement agencies now understood that wives and family members could be both victims and valuable witnesses in complex, white-collar criminal cases. But the most profound change was in myself. The passive, accommodating wife who had spent 15 years managing Gerard's schedule and supporting his ambitions had been replaced by someone I barely recognized and completely respected. I'd returned to graphic design, but on my own terms. My freelance business flourished as word spread about my attention to detail and analytical thinking. Clients who had worked with me during my marriage sought me out, impressed by the confidence and competence I now projected. Mary and I had become close friends again, our college bond strengthened by shared professional respect. She often referred forensic accounting clients to me when they needed someone who understood both financial analysis and visual presentation of complex data. Patricia had become not just my attorney, but a mentor who taught me about legal strategy and women's rights in financial crimes. Together, we'd started speaking at conferences about financial abuse and the importance of recognizing domestic manipulation in seemingly successful marriages. Most importantly, I'd learned to trust my own judgment again. 15 years of being dismissed and underestimated had eroded my confidence in my own perceptions, but systematically outmaneuvering Gerard and his criminal associates had restored my faith in my abilities. I'd bought a smaller house in a different town, decorated exactly to my taste without considering anyone else's preferences. I'd reconnected with friends Gerard had gradually encouraged me to abandon. I'd started traveling to places I wanted to see, not just locations that enhanced Gerard's business networking. The woman Gerard had described as already gone had indeed disappeared, but she'd been replaced by someone far stronger, smarter, and more dangerous than the man who'd planned her destruction could have ever imagined. As I walked out of the courthouse that final day, Nadine adjusting her baby's blanket against the spring breeze, I reflected on Gerard's words from that November. Night in our garage, my wife is already gone. He'd been right. But what he'd failed to understand was that the woman taking her place would be the architect of his complete destruction and the guardian of justice for every family his greed had broken. Gerard had wanted his savings account and his wife to disappear. In the end, he got his wish, but not at all the way he'd planned. Up next, you've got 2 more standout stories right on your screen. If this one hit the mark, you won't want to pass these up. Just click and check them out. And don't forget to subscribe and turn on the notification bell so you don't miss any upload from us.